I found the earrings on a Tuesday. Small diamond studs nestled in blue velvet, tucked inside his briefcase beneath contracts and meeting notes. For a moment, my heart lifted. Our 15th anniversary was approaching, and I'd mentioned wanting something simple, elegant. Just like us, I'd joked over dinner months ago, while Daniel smiled that half smile I'd fallen for in college. But anniversaries were in May. This was February, cold and damp in London, where even sunshine felt hesitant. And the receipt, folded neatly behind the box, was dated 3 days after Valentine's Day, a day he'd spent working late, returning home with nothing but apologies and the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume. I closed the box, returned it exactly as I'd found it, and made dinner as usual. Roasted chicken with rosemary, his favorite. I wore the dress he once said brought out the amber flecks in my eyes, though he hadn't noticed my eyes in what felt like years. That night, I watched him eat, laugh, check his phone too frequently, and wondered when exactly we'd become strangers sharing silverware. "Rebecca called today," I said, casual as discussing weather. "She's finally left Martin." Rebecca, my closest friend since university, had endured her husband's affairs for nearly a decade. Daniel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. About time. The man's an embarrassment. Is he? I tilted my head, studying the man across from me. His tailored shirt, his carefully maintained stubble, the wedding band he still wore faithfully. I wonder what makes some men stray while others don't. "Character," he answered promptly, reaching for his wine. "Weak men cheat." I nodded, letting silence expand between us like an invisible guest. Outside, rain began tapping against windows. Soft, persistent, inevitable, just like the truth working its way through the cracks in our marriage. The earrings remained in his briefcase for exactly 1 week. Then they vanished, presumably delivered to their intended recipient. I never saw them again, never asked about them. Instead, I started keeping a mental inventory of absences, late nights that multiplied like weeds, weekend work emergencies, business trips that extended mysteriously. I noted the pattern of his shirts returning from those trips smelling professionally laundered rather than bearing the scent of our detergent. For our anniversary, he gave me a bracelet, silver with a single sapphire that matched my eyes. We dined at the Savoy, drank champagne, reminisced about our honeymoon in Greece. He held my hand across the table and spoke of the future with convincing enthusiasm. I smiled, participated, performed the role of contented wife while wondering if she, whoever she was, had received diamond earrings or something equally precious. Later that night, while Daniel showered, I checked his phone. The passcode hadn't changed since our wedding day, my birthday. 3 messages from Andrew, office, awaited reading. Andrew, his colleague who I'd met twice at company functions. Andrew, who had apparently developed a habit of sending late-night texts signed with X's and references to hotel rooms. I returned the phone exactly as I'd found it and slipped between our sheets, suddenly aware of how vast a king-sized bed could feel with 2 people in it. When Daniel emerged from the bathroom, trailing steam and cologne, I pretended to be asleep. He didn't try to wake me. The next morning over breakfast, I asked if he was happy. The question landed between us like an unexpected guest. "Of course," he replied too quickly, eyes not quite meeting mine. 15 years. We've built something good, Emily." "Yes," I agreed, watching him over my teacup. "We have, but good things can be dismantled just as carefully as they're built." I'd learned that from Rebecca, who documented her husband's betrayals methodically before leaving him with nothing but his infidelities to keep him warm. I'd always thought her extreme, perhaps even cruel. Now, stirring honey into my tea while my husband checked emails at our breakfast table, I understood her completely. This wasn't about earrings or text messages or perfume lingering on collars. This was about the slow, deliberate death of truth between 2 people who once promised each other everything. I decided, watching him leave for work with a distracted kiss to my cheek, that whatever came next would be entirely on my terms. The first photograph arrived on my phone a week later. A friend of Rebecca's had spotted them at Covent Garden, Daniel and a woman with copper hair cascading down her back. They weren't touching, but they didn't need to be. The way they leaned toward each other, laughing over coffee, told a story I recognized instinctively. I saved the image without responding to the accompanying message. Thought you should know. I didn't confront him. Instead, I opened a new email account with a password he'd never guess, the name of the child we'd once planned to have before careers and comfort took precedence. I began documenting everything with the precision of someone archiving a life about to be abandoned. Receipts for dinners on nights he claimed to be working, screenshots of his location history when he forgot I had access, times, dates, inconsistencies in stories that had once seemed merely forgetful, but now revealed themselves as carefully constructed lies. "You're quiet lately," he observed one Sunday morning, both of us pretending to read, while silence stretched between us like an accusation. "Am I?" I turned a page. "Just thoughtful, I suppose." "About?" I looked up at him, this handsome stranger I'd shared a bed with for 15 years. "The nature of happiness, what we owe each other, whether comfort and contentment are the same thing." He laughed, but his eyes showed concern. Philosophical for a Sunday morning. "Life is short, Daniel. I'm just taking inventory." His phone chimed then. A text he glanced at before excusing himself to handle a work issue. I watched him walk upstairs, listened to the bedroom door close. When he emerged 30 minutes later, he announced an unexpected client emergency requiring his attention downtown. "On Sunday?" I asked mildly. "The Jenkins account. You remember, I mentioned it last week." He hadn't. "Of course. Will you be home for dinner?" "Don't wait up," he said, kissing my forehead before grabbing his keys. After his car disappeared down our tree-lined street, I called Rebecca. "I need your help," I said simply. That afternoon, we sat at her kitchen table while I laid out everything I'd gathered. Rebecca, who'd navigated her own divorce with surgical precision, listened without interruption. "You need more," she finally said. "Bank statements, credit card records, access to his email." She sipped her wine. "And you need to decide what you want." "What I want?" "Yes, darling. Revenge, money, freedom, all of it matters for how we proceed." I considered the question, watching rain blur the view of her garden. "I want the truth recognized. I want him to face what he's done without being able to deny or minimize it." And then, I hesitated. "I want to walk away knowing I've been completely honest while he's been anything but." Rebecca smiled, the same fierce smile I'd seen when she finally left Martin after years of calculated planning. "Then we'll need to be thorough." For the next month, I became a researcher of my own marriage. I learned his bank password while he slept, discovered hotel charges disguised as business lunches, found messages to Andrew arranging meetings that never appeared in his work calendar. I took photographs of his shirt collars bearing lipstick traces he'd missed, saved voice messages where background noise contradicted his claimed location. All the while, I maintained our home with renewed attention. I cooked elaborate meals, suggested weekend plans, initiated sex with unexpected enthusiasm. I watched his initial surprise transform into complacency and then smugness, a man convinced he was successfully balancing two worlds. One evening, after he'd claimed another late meeting, I followed him. Not in some dramatic car chase, but in an Uber that kept a discreet distance. I watched him enter an apartment building in Notting Hill, a neighborhood we'd once discussed moving to before deciding it didn't suit our lifestyle. I noted the time, took a photograph of the building, and went home to prepare his favorite meal. When he returned near midnight, I greeted him warmly in silk pajamas, accepting his story about the difficult client meeting without comment. Later, as he slept beside me, I added the new information to my growing file. The truth, I was discovering, wasn't a sudden revelation, but a patient archaeology, each day uncovering another fragment of the life he'd built separate from ours. And with each discovery, I felt something shifting inside me. Not just anger or betrayal, but a curious sense of awakening. The woman I'd been before knowing was disappearing, and someone stronger, clearer-eyed was emerging in her place. Summer arrived with an unexpected heat wave that left London drowsy and irritable. Our bedroom air conditioner hummed constantly, fighting temperatures that seemed determined to expose what had long been simmering beneath the surface. The time had come. I'd gathered enough evidence to present an irrefutable case, and more importantly, I'd gathered enough strength to face whatever came after. I chose a Thursday, his lightest workday when he typically came home by 6. I prepared his favorite meal one last time, opened a bottle of the Bordeaux we'd brought back from our 10th anniversary trip to France, and laid the table with the china we reserved for special occasions. The folder containing copies of everything I'd discovered sat on the sideboard, cream-colored and innocuous. When Daniel arrived home, his eyebrows raised at the candlelit scene. "What's the occasion?" "Clarity," I answered, pouring him wine. We ate with unusual conversation, reminiscing about our early days, the apartment we'd first shared near Camden, the ambitious dreams we'd had before settling into comfortable routine. I studied him as we talked. This man I'd woven my life around, and felt a curious mixture of sadness and liberation. "You seem different lately," he observed, reaching for my hand across the table. "I am different," I agreed. "Understanding changes people." His fingers tightened slightly around mine. "Understanding what?" I slipped my hand from his and stood, retrieving the folder. "Her name is Olivia Harper. She's 32, works at the architecture firm across from yours, and has been your lover for approximately 11 months. I placed the folder before him. "You've taken her to dinner 17 times at restaurants you've never brought me to. You spent Valentine's Day with her at the Dorchester. Rather extravagant for a casual affair. You bought her diamond earrings from Asprey that cost more than our first car." His face drained of color as I continued, my voice steady. "You have a key to her flat in Notting Hill. The neighborhood you told me was overpriced and pretentious when I suggested moving there 3 years ago. You've taken 4 business trips together, carefully arranged to appear separate in company records. And most interestingly, you've opened a separate bank account where you've been transferring funds monthly, nearly £30,000 accumulated so far." The silence that followed felt like a physical presence between us. Daniel stared at the closed folder, not reaching for it. "How long have you known?" he finally asked, voice barely audible. "Long enough to be certain, recent enough to still feel the sting." I remained standing, unwilling to resume our places at the table. "What I don't understand is why you continued the pretense. If you wanted her, why maintain this charade?" He looked up then, his expression a complex mixture of shame and defiance. "It wasn't planned. It just happened, and then I couldn't choose." "Couldn't? Or wouldn't?" I shook my head. "You chose every day, Daniel. Every lie was a choice. Every night you came home to me after being with her was a choice. Emily, we can work through this. Couples recover from affairs all the time. 15 years. 15 years during which I believed in something that apparently didn't exist." I gestured to the folder. "Everything's there. Dates, times, photographs, financial records. I'm not interested in denials or excuses or promises of reform." He stood abruptly, anger finally breaking through his shock. "You've been spying on me? Following me? Going through my personal accounts? That's disturbing, Emily." I laughed, a genuine sound that surprised us both. "That's what disturbs you? Not your betrayal or dishonesty, but my investigation of it? How convenient. What do you want? Money? The house? Is this some kind of blackmail?" The accusation struck me as so absurd that I felt only pity. "I want nothing from you except acknowledgement of the truth. No gaslighting, no minimizing, no blame shifting. Just honesty. Finally. And then what?" His voice held equal parts fear and challenge. "Then I leave." I reached for my wine glass, oddly calm. "I've already retained a solicitor. The divorce papers are being prepared. I'll be staying with Rebecca until I find a place of my own." "You've decided all this without even talking to me?" His incredulity seemed genuine. "Without giving us a chance?" "You gave us no chance the moment you decided to live a double life." I met his gaze directly. "I deserve more than being an option, Daniel. I deserve truth, loyalty, and respect, none of which you've offered me for quite some time." He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 43 years. "I do love you," he said quietly. "In my way. Your way is insufficient." I placed my napkin beside my half-eaten meal. "I've packed what I need for now. I'll arrange to collect the rest later." As I moved toward the door, he called after me, voice breaking slightly. "Was any of it real? These past months when things seemed better between us? I paused, hand on the doorframe, and looked back at the ruins of our carefully constructed life. It was real for me. I was saying goodbye to something I thought was precious. What was it for you? His silence provided the only answer I needed. Outside, summer twilight bathed London in golden light as I walked to the waiting taxi, my steps lighter than they had been in years. Rebecca's guest room became my sanctuary during those first disorienting weeks. Mornings began with tea on her small balcony overlooking a community garden, where elderly men tended vegetables with religious devotion. I'd watch them, these strangers moving with purpose through orderly rows, and envy their certainty. My own life felt uprooted, exposed. Soil turned over to reveal what had been hidden beneath. The calls from Daniel started immediately, first pleading, then angry, finally calculating. He'd found my evidence folder, of course, and alternated between admitting everything and claiming I'd misunderstood innocent situations. The desperation in his voice almost made me laugh. How easily truth becomes malleable when one is caught. He's offered a settlement, my solicitor informed me during our third meeting. Quite generous, actually. He wants this handled quietly and quickly. I'm sure he does, I replied, studying the figures. The amount was substantial, more than fair, even without fighting for what I legally deserved after 15 years. His reputation matters more than anything. Most men in his position feel the same, she observed. A woman who'd negotiated hundreds of divorces with the same cool efficiency she now brought to mine. Will you accept? I thought of the life we'd built, the home filled with carefully selected objects meant to reflect success and taste. None of it seemed important anymore. Yes, with one condition. I want the cottage in Cornwall. Her eyebrows raised slightly. The seaside property had been an impulsive purchase 3 years ago. A weekend retreat we'd visited perhaps 5 times total. Daniel had always complained about its remoteness, the spotty mobile reception, the damp that never quite left the stone walls. He'll likely agree. It's not a significant asset compared to the London property. She was right. The papers returned signed within days. The cottage deeded solely to me without negotiation. My first victory felt strangely hollow. Friends emerged in distinct categories after news of our separation spread. Some disappeared entirely, uncomfortable with the messy reality of endings. Others chose sides. Their loyalties predicted accurately in most cases. A surprising few revealed themselves as genuine, checking in regularly without expectation or judgment. My mother, calling from her retirement flat in Bath, offered predictable wisdom. Men have always been weak creatures, darling. The real question is what you'll do with your freedom. Freedom. The word felt foreign, both terrifying and exhilarating. For 15 years, my identity had been carefully constructed around being Daniel's wife. The dinner parties I hosted, the charity committees I joined at his suggestion, the holidays planned around his schedule. Now, at 41, I found myself with no fixed obligations beyond breathing. Rebecca found me one evening staring at my reflection, scissors in hand, contemplating the shoulder-length hair Daniel had always preferred. Planning a dramatic transformation? She asked, leaning against the doorframe. Considering it, I admitted. Isn't that what women do after divorce? Cut their hair, change everything about themselves? She took the scissors gently. Only if that's what you want. Not as rebellion or erasure. I let my hands fall. I don't know what I want. That's the problem. I've spent so long being what he needed that I've forgotten who I am without him. Then that's your first task, she said simply. Remember. That night, sleepless in the unfamiliar bed, I began making lists. Foods I genuinely liked versus those I'd learned to prepare because they were his favorites. Books I'd abandoned because he found my reading habits too escapist. Places I'd dreamed of visiting but never suggested because they didn't align with his preference for luxury hotels and Michelin-starred restaurants. The woman emerging from these lists seemed like a stranger. Someone more adventurous, less concerned with appearances, with simpler tastes and bolder dreams than the carefully curated wife I'd become. I wondered if she still existed beneath the layers of compromise and accommodation, or if I'd need to invent her entirely. Morning found me exhausted but resolute. Over coffee, I told Rebecca, I'm going to the cottage. I need space that isn't defined by either of us. She nodded, unsurprised. How long? I don't know. Until I figure out who I am when nobody's watching. 3 days later, I loaded my car with necessities and drove west toward Cornwall, leaving London's familiar chaos behind. As the landscape changed from urban sprawl to rolling countryside, something tight in my chest began to loosen. With each mile, I felt myself shedding some invisible weight, expectations perhaps, or the constant awareness of being seen and judged. By the time I reached the cottage, twilight was settling over the cliffs. The air smelled of salt and earth. Inside, everything was exactly as we'd left it months ago, slightly musty but welcoming in its simplicity. I opened all the windows despite the chill, inviting the sea air to cleanse whatever lingered from our past visits. That night, I slept dreamlessly for the first time since discovering the earrings that had unraveled everything. Days at the cottage fell into a rhythm entirely my own. I woke with the sun, wrapped in blankets on the small porch that faced the restless Atlantic. Mornings were for walking, along cliff paths where gorse bloomed yellow against gray stone, through the nearby village with its single pub and tiny shop selling local produce. I learned to bake bread from a dog-eared cookbook left by previous owners, filling the cottage with warmth and the earthy scent of yeast. The locals regarded me with curious distance at first. Another Londoner seeking temporary escape, they assumed. But as weeks stretched into months, something shifted. Mrs. Trewin from the village shop began setting aside the freshest eggs for me. Old Tom, who maintained the coastal paths, tipped his hat when we passed, occasionally offering observations about weather or wildlife that required no response. "You're staying on, then?" he asked one misty morning, both of us pausing to watch seals basking on distant rocks. "I think I am," I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. The divorce finalized without requiring my presence in London. Papers arrived, were signed, and returned with business-like efficiency. My solicitor called with news of the final settlement, sounding pleased with the outcome. I thanked her politely while watching waves crash against the shore, already disconnected from the negotiations that had once seemed so important. Rebecca visited occasionally, bringing city gossip and concern poorly disguised as casual interest in my rustic experiment. During her second visit, she arrived with a carload of my remaining possessions from storage. "Daniel's sold the house," she announced, helping me carry boxes inside. Moved into the Notting Hill flat with her. They're engaged, apparently. I waited for pain or anger to surface, but found only mild curiosity. That was quick. "Are you all right?" She studied my face with the intensity of someone expecting to find cracks in a facade. I considered the question honestly. "I'm better than all right. I'm becoming real again." After she left, I sorted through the boxes, keeping only what resonated with the person I was discovering myself to be. The rest I donated to the charity shop in the next village over, releasing my grip on objects that had once seemed essential to my identity. With the settlement money carefully invested, I had the luxury of time without immediate financial pressure. I began writing again, something I'd abandoned shortly after marriage when Daniel had gently suggested my stories were charming but hardly commercial. Now I wrote without concern for audience or outcome, filling notebooks with observations, memories, fictional characters who arrived uninvited and demanded attention. In March, nearly 6 months after leaving London, I received an unexpected email from Martin, Rebecca's ex-husband. He was starting a small publishing house focused on women's fiction and memoir, having apparently found redemption through creative enterprise after his own disgrace. "Rebecca mentioned your writing again," he wrote. "I'd be interested in seeing your work, if you're willing to share." The invitation sparked something dormant. Ambition, perhaps, or simply the desire to be heard. I sent him 3 short stories, expecting nothing. His response came within days. "These are extraordinary, Emily. Raw and honest in ways that make me deeply uncomfortable, which is precisely what good writing should do. Would you consider putting together a collection?" And so began my next chapter, quite literally. Through spring and into summer, I wrote with disciplined abandon, sending pages to Martin, who returned them with thoughtful notes and increasing enthusiasm. The stories weren't autobiographical, exactly, but they explored truths about connection and betrayal that I understood intimately. My cottage transformed alongside me. I painted the kitchen yellow, planted an herb garden that struggled valiantly against the salt air, adopted an elderly cat from the village vet who needed little more than a warm place to sleep, an occasional acknowledgement of his existence. We suited each other perfectly. On my birthday, my first since the divorce, I swam in the sea despite the bracing cold, emerging breathless and laughing. That evening, I lit a fire and opened wine, toasting myself and the strange, winding path that had led me here. My phone buzzed with messages from Rebecca and other friends who remembered the date, but also one from Daniel. "Happy birthday, Em. I hope you're well. I think of you often." I read it twice, searching for the familiar tug of longing or resentment. Finding neither, I simply replied, "Thank you. I wish you happiness," and meant it. Later, walking along the moonlit beach, I realized the most unexpected gift of my unraveled marriage, the discovery that happiness wasn't something attached to another person or dependent on their recognition. It existed in moments like this: sand between my toes, salt on my skin, the vast possibility of a sky scattered with stars. The manuscript was finished by autumn, 12 stories linked by themes of transformation and second chances. Martin's enthusiasm bordered on evangelical. "We'll publish in spring," he promised. "These stories deserve to be read, Emily. You've created something remarkable." I accepted his praise with newfound grace, neither dismissing it nor requiring it for validation. The work itself had been the reward. The discipline of showing up daily at my small desk overlooking the sea, wrestling thoughts into words until they reflected some essential truth. One evening, as golden light washed over the cottage walls and my cat dozed contentedly in a patch of fading sunshine, I realized I'd gone an entire day without thinking of my previous life. The woman I'd been then, careful, accommodating, constantly vigilant, seemed like a character in someone else's story, not quite forgotten, but no longer defining the narrative. The book launch was held in early June, when London shimmered with an optimism that even the most jaded residents couldn't entirely resist. The bookshop, independent, fiercely championed by local literary circles, had filled beyond capacity, with people spilling onto the pavement, where staff had hastily arranged additional chairs and glasses of Prosecco. I wore a dress the color of sea glass, purchased from a local designer in Cornwall whose shop occupied an old boathouse. My hair, grown longer and lightened by sun, was simply arranged. No jewelry except small pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's, a conscious choice to arrive as myself, unadorned and comfortable in that simplicity. Martin had orchestrated the event with surprising skill, gathering reviewers and influencers alongside genuine readers who'd responded to advance copies with enthusiasm that still felt surreal. Rebecca sat in the front row, her pride so evident it almost embarrassed me. I dedicated the book to her, for R, who showed me how to stand in truth. The reading went well, my voice growing stronger as I shared excerpts from stories that had once existed only in the privacy of my cottage. Questions followed, thoughtful and engaged. A young woman with intense eyes asked if writing had been therapeutic after my divorce, news of which had formed part of the publicity narrative, despite my initial reluctance. "Not therapeutic," I corrected gently. "Revelatory. Writing didn't heal me so much as show me I wasn't as broken as I believed." Afterward, during the signing portion, I looked up from inscribing a book to find Daniel standing before me, older somehow than the 14 months since our parting would account for. Well-dressed as always, but with something hesitant in his posture that I'd never associated with him. "Congratulations," he said quietly, placing a copy of my book on the table. "I've already read it. Twice, actually." I maintained my composure, though my heart accelerated with surprise rather than distress. "Thank you for coming. I wouldn't have expected it." "I almost didn't," he admitted. "But these stories, they're extraordinary, Emily. I needed to tell you that." I signed his copy, conscious of the line forming behind him. "How are you, Daniel?" "Managing." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "The wedding's been postponed. Indefinitely, as it turns out." Something in his tone invited questions, sympathy perhaps, but I offered neither. Whatever had transpired between him and Olivia belonged to a life I no longer inhabited. I simply nodded, closed his book, and handed it back. "I hope you find your way." He lingered momentarily, clearly wanting more, but the publicist was already ushering the next person forward. I watched him move toward the exit, shoulders slightly curved, and felt an unexpected surge of compassion. not for what might have been, but for what simply was. Two people who had once known each other intimately, now moving along separate paths. The evening concluded with dinner at a small restaurant Martin had selected for its discreet atmosphere and excellent wine list. Rebecca joined us, along with 2 editors from the publishing house and a reviewer whose praise had apparently helped secure additional bookshop orders. Conversation flowed easily, centered on future projects and publishing industry gossip rather than my personal history. "You seem different," Rebecca observed as we shared a taxi afterward. London sliding past our windows in a blur of lights and movement. Centered, somehow. "Seeing Daniel was strange," I admitted, "but not in the way I might have expected. Did it hurt?" I considered the question seriously. No. It clarified something, though. I spent 15 years being shaped by his perception, trying to fit myself into the space he allocated. Now I exist independently of his gaze, and that feels— I searched for the right word— authentic. The following morning, I packed for my return to Cornwall, gathering complimentary copies of my book, and a ridiculous number of congratulatory flowers that I distributed among hotel staff. My train wasn't until afternoon, leaving time for a final coffee with Rebecca. "Will you stay in Cornwall forever?" she asked as we claimed a corner table at our favorite cafe. "Now that you're officially a successful author and all." I laughed at her phrasing. "One modestly selling collection hardly makes me successful, but yes, I think I will. It suits me. And what about—" She hesitated uncharacteristically. "Other possibilities? Relationships?" The question didn't surprise me. Rebecca, despite her own complicated history with marriage, remained a romantic at heart. I stirred my coffee thoughtfully. "I'm open to connection," I said finally, "but I'm no longer waiting for someone else to complete my story." On the train journey west, watching London recede into countryside, I reflected on the strange circular path that had brought me here. The woman who had discovered diamond earrings hidden in a briefcase could never have imagined standing in a packed bookshop, reading her own words to attentive strangers. She couldn't have conceptualized the peace I now carried, hard-won through months of solitude and self-discovery. As the landscape shifted toward the familiar contours of Cornwall, I felt the subtle unwinding that always accompanied my return. London, with its noise and energy, its memories both painful and newly triumphant, belonged to a part of my life that I could now visit without being consumed by it. The taxi from the station wound along narrow lanes edged with late-blooming foxgloves. When we crested the final hill, the cottage came into view, stone walls warmed by evening light, windows reflecting the approaching sunset. My cat would be waiting, indignant at my absence, yet desperately pretending indifference upon my return. Tomorrow, I would wake to the sound of waves and birds, make coffee to drink on the porch, and perhaps begin writing something new. The blank page no longer terrified me, neither the literal one in my notebook, nor the metaphorical one my life had become. Both offered the same precious gift, the freedom to continue my own story, sentence by sentence, day by day, in my own voice at last.